Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Motes. On today's episode, Wedge Antilles begins taking on more responsibilities. For his first assignment, Wedge is sent to the neutral planet of Adumar to bring the world into the New Republic. The leaders of Adumar are obsessed with fighter pilots, but negotiations won't be easy for Wedge, because there's also a delegation of Imperial pilots on the planet, trying to convince Adumar to join the Remnant. But the most dangerous threat to Wedge and his negotiations may come from a fellow New Republic agent. It's X-Wing Starfighters of Adumar by Aaron Alston, the 9th book in the X-Wing series. And joining me to talk about the book, it's friend of the show, Thomas, from the TK331 podcast. Thomas, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. This is actually my favorite time of the year. So just as a little peek behind the curtains to the listener, we are recording this on April 18th. This is the first day of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Game 1 between Ottawa and Carolina. Puck drop is happening in the next 10 minutes or so. So this is my favorite time of the year. And also, later this week is Crystal's birthday, so I get to celebrate my favorite person's birthday as well. So this is a great time of the year for me.
Thomas, what some people may not know about you is you do a little bit of work on the side for one of the hockey teams out there in California, the Anaheim Ducks.
Not for the team, no. For one of the many fan sites that exist.
Oh, okay.
I do some writing for a blog called Ducks and Pucks, focused mainly on their minor league team, the San Diego Gulls, who are also in the Calder Cup playoffs, which will start. They haven't announced the date yet, but in the next week or so as well. And just a lot of their prospect stuff. I kind of just enjoy watching a player get drafted, see how they develop, and then watch their career in full. I really got interested in that stuff 20 years ago. I first became a fan, and I've just enjoyed watching a player's entire career arc happen.
And you really have to enunciate the name of that blog before you tell someone what it is, correct?
Yes, Ducks and Pucks, not and.
So, listeners, Thomas has been on the show here before. It's been a while. For any of you who may not be familiar with Thomas or the TK331 podcast, could you tell the listeners about your show?
Sure. So we are just like you. We're a Legends podcast. We are a husband and wife duo. We started with the Truce of Bakura several years ago. We actually just had our 5th anniversary, and we've just been going forward in order. Right now, we are in the middle of the Young Jedi Knight series, which Crystal is not the world's biggest fan of. I know you aren't either, Aaron. So, but it's a lot of fun to do. These are books that I grew up with in the 90s reading, and yeah, I love talking about Star Wars. One of my favorite things to do.
How did you come up with the idea for the show, the format, and how did you convince Crystal to go along with you?
The convincing was definitely the hardest part. But for the idea, so I think it was a lot like you. We started in the middle of the pandemic, and we were just kind of looking for something to fill that void. And I listened to, there's a hockey podcast I listen to called the Puck Podcast, and I also listened to Star Wars Explained. And, I would listen to both of them and like, you know what? They are talking about something that they really love and have a passion for. I can give it a shot. I can see what that's like. And it's been, frankly, I think more work than I expected it to be in a lot of ways, as you, I'm sure, have found over the years. But it's also just a lot of fun being able to talk about these stories that mean so much to me, and even the ones that don't mean so much to me.
Well, Thomas, I really appreciate you joining me on the show today. But before we talk about today's book, let's take a listener question. Today's email comes from Dan, who has a Star Wars question that's pretty relevant to events going on in the real world today. Dan says, "Hi, Aaron. George Lucas was criticized for The Phantom Menace for showing that the Trade Federation blockading Naboo would lead to all the events that followed in the prequel trilogy. The United States is currently blockading an international trade route, which may result in some serious unforeseen consequences. With what's happening now in the real world, Does the blockade of Naboo feel as silly or as far-fetched as it did then? Well, thank you very much for the email, Dan. Pretty heavy question, Thomas. Do you have any opinions on whether or not the Trade Federation's actions at the beginning of the Phantom Menace relate to some of the things happening right now in the world?
I think it absolutely does, unfortunately. One thing, though, I will disagree with one thing that Dan says of the unforeseen consequences of the current blockade. A lot of these consequences, I think, were foreseen by some people, and they warned people who did this, and they were ignored. So that is the one quibble I'll make, but I also think this is a great question. I remember when Phantom Menace came out, and people, they didn't like the politics of that movie, or the prequel trilogy in general. But that's actually, for me at least, I've always found that to be one of the strongest parts of the prequel trilogy. I'm also a little weird. I'm a history major, so that's the kind of thing that I really get into and like. So I recognize that I am the abnormal one and that kind of thing. But I do appreciate that this is making some people reassess the Phantom Menace and what George did in that movie. And one thing also I will add is I am just really sad in our real world that the villain is nowhere near as smart and manipulative as Palpatine was. It would make this easier to swallow, I feel like.
Well, I want to be clear to the listeners, as you said a little earlier, Thomas, we are recording this on April 18th. So when this airs,
things change quickly.
Things could be different. The blockade of Iranian ports may be over by the time this airs. We have no idea. But to answer Dan's questions, it seems very much the same. It seems that I'm not going to say that one side seems to be as innocent as Naboo did in The Phantom Menace. However, it appears that the side that is blockading has been the aggressor in this instance. And we're going to see the ramifications of this, not just for the remainder of this year, but for years to come, if the experts are correct, both economically, politically, and, you know, the world after this incident may not be a safer place for years to come.
I would sadly agree with that.
Thank you again for the question, Dan. Now, listener, if you'd like to ask a question, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Blue Sky, Instagram, or Twitter at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, you can record it and email it in, but please record it in MP3 audio format. Now, coming up at the end of the show, Thomas and I have another email to share, as Paolo wanted to give his opinions about the Dark Empire comics that I talked about a couple episodes ago. And in honor of the recent NCAA tournaments, Paolo submitted a March Madness-inspired Star Wars character grouping. You want to stick around for that. But for now, it's time for today's book, X-Wing, Starfighters of Adumar by Aaron Alston. Listener, grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge.
The story begins at the edge of wild space on the planet Adumar. The world has been isolated since the days of Old Republic, but it was recently rediscovered by a New Republic survey ship. The planet doesn't have a lot of natural resources, and it's less technologically advanced than most of the rest of the galaxy. But Adumar does have a thriving missile production industry, and the New Republic needs munitions.
The Senate sends General Wedge Antilles to convince the Purrater of Kartan, the planet's largest nation, to join the New Republic. So why would New Republic intelligence send Wedge, Tycho Selchu, Wes Jansen, and Hobby Clivian instead of trained diplomats? Because the Adumari revere starfighter pilots, so much so that the planet's government and culture revolves around pilots and dogfighting and honor feuds. Wedge feels like a fish out of water, but to help with negotiations, there is a New Republic diplomat on the planet, a former Y-Wing pilot himself named Tomer Darpin, and a documentarian named Hollis Saper to record everything.
Immediately after he arrives, Wedge learns the negotiations are not going to be normal. As soon as they enter the atmosphere, the rogues are challenged to battle because of Adumar's best fighter pilots want to measure themselves against the New Republic's most celebrated fighter pilots. Wedge refuses each challenge initially. The Adumar pilots aren't actually that good, and the rogues don't want to kill anybody. But Tomer says that the Adumari are starting to lose respect for Wedge. If he doesn't start accepting some challenges, the Praetor may reject the New Republic and decide to join the Empire.
That's right. The Imperial Remnant is on Adumar too, led by ace TIE fighter pilot Tur Fanir and Admiral Terran Rogris, commander of the Star Destroyer Agonizer. Tomer tells Wedge that Fanir has been accepting challenges from across the planet, and in the eyes of the Adumari people, the appeal of the Imperial Remnant is quickly rising. Still, Wedge refuses to kill anyone he's not at war with. But he does agree to Tomer's advice, with a caveat. Wedge and the rogues will accept challenges from any pilots who agree to use non-lethal munitions. It's an unusual request, and it doesn't make Tomer completely happy, but it is a start.
One final thing that throws a wrench into negotiations. Adumar is not a united world, and the Praetor of Cartan is not the leader of the entire planet. He may not have the legal authority to enter into a treaty with the New Republic or the Imperial Remnant. In fact, most of the Praetors of the other nations are furious at what they see as an obvious power grab. Given all these variables to the negotiations, Wedge begins to suspect something more is going on beneath the surface, something that he hasn't been briefed about, and it's time to figure out what that is.
The rogues begin snooping around and discover there's a New Republic intelligence agent in Cartan, Wedge's old friend, Ayala Waseri. When Wedge asks what is really going on and why he's leading negotiations for the New Republic instead of Tomer, Ayala says the mission to Adumar isn't really a diplomatic one. It's an intelligence operation. The New Republic knew the Praetor was also talking to the Imperial Remnant. The orders of the agent leading the operation are clear. Bring Adumar and its munitions manufacturing operations into the New Republic by any means necessary. And if they can't, stop them from joining the Imperial Remnant by any means necessary.
Wedge secretly contacts Admiral Rogris on the Agonizer. The two military leaders may be enemies, but they respect each other. Wedge tells the Admiral that he resents what he's been ordered to do on Adumar, and he bets Rogris feels the same way. Wedge says that if Adumar either remains neutral or joins the Republic, he bets Admiral Rogris is under orders to invade and conquer the planet. Rogris won't confirm Wedge's suspicion, but hypothetically, if Rogris was ordered to do something he didn't agree with, he asks Wedge what he wants Rogris to do about it. Wedge tells the Admiral to just leave the Remnant, defect. Rogris says if he does that, he'll be signing his own death warrant, and he'll be putting his children in danger. Wedge says he can tell Rogris is disgusted by his orders. He tells the Admiral to think about his offer. It's good until for as long as Wedge remains in Adumar.
A few days later, the Praetor of Cartan finally makes his decision. But it's not what everyone expects. The Praetor doesn't choose the New Republic or the Imperial Remnant. He decides to conquer the other Adumari nations and form a new planetary government with himself as the leader. He requests Wedge and Tur Fanir to order their fighters to help with his war. When Wedge refuses, Tomer whispers something to the Praetor, who orders Wedge, Tycho, Hobby, and Jansen to run the gauntlet back to the spaceport. If they make it there, they'll be safe. But until then, everyone in Cartan will be hunting them.
When the rogues leave the government building, they're met by the mob. The rogues hijack a speeder and tear off through the streets with thousands of Cartan citizens in pursuit. Wedge crashes the speeder into an apartment building. The rogues steal some clothes, slip through the building, and sneak out the back. They make their way through some back alleys and find themselves at the outskirts of the spaceport. They find another speeder and head straight toward the crowd guarding the front gate. Wedge orders the rogues to fire at the mob, but to keep their shots high. They don't want to hit anyone if they can help it. The gambit works. Most of the people in the crowd throw themselves to the ground. Wedge slams the speeder through the gate and enters the spaceport grounds. For the moment, the rogues are safe.
Now they need to make it to the Allegiance up in orbit. Unfortunately, their X-Wings have been confiscated. They'll have to escape in 4 Adumari blade fighters. The rogues are much better pilots than their Adumari compatriots, but 4 fighters are no match against 50. Instead of flying straight up to the Allegiance, they try to use the terrain to their advantage, hoping to escape Cartan and make their way to orbit from one of the neighboring countries. Suddenly, Hobby's blade is hit, and he's forced to land. Jansen follows him down to protect him. That leaves Wedge and Tycho still in the air. The 2 aces try to keep the Adumari pilots at bay, but they're still outnumbered 10-1. Suddenly, out of nowhere, new squadrons of blades arrive. They're from the surrounding nations. They overwhelm the blades from Cartan and protect the rogues.
Wedge and the rogues, along with Ayala, Hollis, and their Adumari guide Cheris, join with the forces of the Yetagon Confederacy, a group of smaller nations united to overthrow Cartan. When the Puritors of the Confederacy ask Wedge to lead their forces, he agrees if the troops agree to follow his orders. There will be no duels, no honor battles. They will act like a proper military. Wedge says that if the Adumari listen to him, even though they're outnumbered, they have a chance to defeat Cartan and its allies.
Wedge, Tycho, and Ayala come up with a 2-prong attack. The fighters will clear a path into the airspace over the capital of Cartan, while Cheris leads the ground forces into the city to capture the Parader and find the rogues' X-Wings. The morning of the attack, Wedge and the Paraders of the Yetagon Confederacy rename themselves the Adumari Union, an alliance of nations representing all of Adumar, all the nations except Cartan and his allies, of course.
The battle begins. Wedge's fighters are outnumbered, but the disciplined Union forces overwhelm the unruly Cartan fighters. Cheris's ground commandos find the 4 X-Wings, and quickly the rogues claim the skies over Cartan's capital. Wedge and the Adumari Union place the Parator of Cartan under arrest. Wedge gives the Parator a choice: surrender and go to prison, or abdicate and go into exile in the mountains outside the city. The Parator agrees to abdicate. He turns control of Cartan over to his son, who agrees to join the Adumari Union.
After the battle, a united Adumar decides to join the new republic. The announcement delights Tomer, but Wedge knows the Imperial remnant won't go away easily. The Agonizer calls for reinforcements, but not from Admiral Rogris. The bridge crew can't find him. He's disappeared. Without their commander, the Imperials are forced to retreat when New Republic forces arrive. It turns out, Rogris snuck back to the service of Adumar. Wedge introduces Rogris to the new Adumari leaders, who ask the now former Imperial Admiral to take command of Adumar's planetary defense forces.
In the aftermath of the battle, Ayala contacts General Aaron Kraken. She and Wedge tell Kraken about everything that happened on Adumar, including the actions of Tomer Darpin. It turns out, Tomer wasn't actually a member of the New Republic Diplomatic Corps. He was Kraken's lead intelligence agent on Adumar. The story ends with Kraken recalling Tomer. The rogues return to duty with Tycho in command. Wedge prepares for a new assignment as a New Republic flag officer, and he and Ayala begin a new relationship together and agree to marry.
Time to take a break. When Thomas and I return, we'll talk more about X-Wing Starfighters of Adumar. I'm Aaron Moats. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But allow me to recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Cataclysm continues the story of Phase 2 of the High Republic. The fighting continues between the worlds of Iram and Arano. The Jedi think the situation is being manipulated by a mysterious group called the Path of the Open Hand. The Path claims the Force should be free to guide all peaceful people in the galaxy, but Jedi Knight Gela Natai believes the group's leader has a much more sinister plan to grab power for herself. Will Gela unravel the mystery before the Path turns the galaxy against the Jedi Order? Find out in Cataclysm by Lydia Kang. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. And today, I'm joined by Thomas from the TK331 podcast, and we're discussing X-Wing, Starfighters of Adumar by Aaron Alston, book number 9 in the X-Wing series. So Thomas, it's been a couple years since you and Crystal discussed this book on your show, but you've read this book 3 or 4 times. What are your overall thoughts?
Honestly, if I'm probably more than 3 or 4 times, I would bet. Overall, I really like this book. I'm going to say a couple things that make me sound like I don't like it. So at this point, the 9 X-Wing books, I think this is my least favorite in the series. But that doesn't mean I think it's a bad book. It's just not as strong as the Rogue and Wraith books. I think Stackpole's first 4 Rogue books are 4 of the best Star Wars books of the 90s, full stop. And I think the Wraith books, while not as strong, are still such a unique take on the Star Wars mythos, and just they're so funny and tragic and so different than anything else that those books really stand out differently from this one. So while it doesn't hit those highs of those earlier books, it's still a really good book. How about you?
I think the older I get, the more I appreciate long-form storytelling. I like my stories to take place over a few seasons of television, a series of movies, a series of books. I like to really become engrossed in the storyline, and I like to feel like I have some sort of relationship with the characters by the end. Of course, considering who the characters are in this book, I do have a relationship with them, but unlike the other X-Wing stories, this one does just feel like a one-off, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a one-off that, honestly, if Tycho, Jansen, and Hobby weren't in the book, is this really an X-Wing story? I mean, it's Wedge on a diplomatic mission is what it is.
Yeah. So I think it's the weakest X-Wing book to this point, but I also think it's Wedge's best book. Like, he gets the most to do. He is the central character. He's the POV character in a way that he doesn't get to be in the earlier books. The other books are focused on Corrin, Face, Kel, in a way that Wedge is always there, but he's always like the primary secondary character. He's never the main character. He finally gets to be that in this book. And I love this book for that, because Wedge is one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. So I think this is his best book. I just think the plot of the book is not as strong as what has come before.
When it comes to the military, and I have some experience with this, being in it right now, you can't stay in your current position for too long before your superiors expect you to start taking on more responsibility and start moving your way up the chain of command. And this is one of the first stories where we see Wedge given more responsibility and Wedge expected to start becoming more than just the commander of a fighter squadron. What did you think of Wedge's first quote-unquote mission as something more than just the leader of 12 starfighters?
I liked it a lot. So this actually, I like how this ties back into the bet that he and Akbar had back in the Wraith books about how if he, I forget the exact terms, but basically, if he failed, he would become a general. If he didn't fail, he would stay where he is, and Akbar at the end still made him a general because he's Wedge Antilles. He's one of the greatest pilots and leaders the Rebellion and Republic have. So, of course, he's going to keep moving up. But I like that he never really feels quite comfortable, and especially in this book. He's not just a pilot or a general. He's a diplomat. He is so far out of his comfort zone. But he also has learned things from his previous experiences that he takes into this. There's a moment early in the book when he first gets there, he's got to give a speech. And I think it's Wes who asks him, "Hey, boss, do you have a speech prepared?" And Wedge is like, "No, I don't have a speech, but I do have like a 5-point outline I've kind of come up with in my time as I've moved up through the ranks of the military of how to give speeches when I'm not ready for it." And he gives a speech, and the Adumar crowd just eats it up. They love him so much. He's like, maybe I can pull this off. So I love that he's never quite comfortable, but I also love at the same time he's still very competent in what he's doing.
In my opinion, it's like the best speeches that are made at weddings, or the best speeches that are made at the rehearsal dinner the night before. If the speech is longer than a minute, I lose interest. I mean, I understand sometimes you get a nice, funny story in there, but just say what you need to say, toast to the happy couple, and let's get to eating, because that's what we're there for. We're there to eat.
Yep. Hopefully good food.
So Adumar was an isolated world. Somehow they developed a culture that revered fighter pilots.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that should have put a little bit of a warning alarm for Wedge is when they show up, and each time they are challenged initially, the Adumari fighters call him by name as this great hero of the New Republic. Supposedly, this planet had only been discovered, or rediscovered, I should say, only about, a year and a half prior? Something like that? And yet everyone already knows about Wedge Antilles. And conversely, Wedge doesn't know this, but they know about Turf Veneer on the Imperial side. So maybe this planet wasn't quite as isolated for as long as what Wedge was given to believe.
Yeah. There's definitely things that show Wedge is still learning on the job, I guess is the best way. There are things he really should put together, and eventually he does. Like I remember there's a moment early in the book where they're at a state dinner, is the best way to put it, and he sees Aela, and he doesn't immediately run over and start talking to her, even though I think Parva really wants him to. And says like, Wes, go talk to that woman over there. Don't blow her cover. Let her know I want to speak with her at some point. So like, he's learned the political game, but he hasn't quite put it all together. And I think that example you're bringing up is a great example of him not quite getting it all there yet.
What did you think of the culture around Adumar? Because there have been cultures in our world that somehow revolve around this celebration of violence, celebration of honor duels, celebration of whoever the best fighter is the best person. Mm-hmm. How do you think that was depicted here in this book?
That's actually one of the things I like about this book a lot. I've always kind of thought Alston was writing critique of, frankly, us. We as a society, we like to have the bigger gun. We think might makes right. Now that's not obviously everything about us here, but that is a large part of our culture and our heritage. And I've always thought that Alston was critiquing our love of fights and honor. And I appreciate that about this book a lot. There are times I feel like he's not being subtle at all, and I'm here for it when Star Wars authors are not subtle when they are critiquing our world and our way of life, because while we've done a lot of great things, we also have a long way to go. And if you look at us through this Cartan Adumar lens, God, do we have a long way to go.
Sure. Yeah. So you mentioned that Wedge may be a little slow on the uptick, but he does start to figure out that something else is going on below the surface. His presumably diplomatic attaché is a man named Tomer Darpin. It turns out Tomer's not a part of the diplomatic corps. He's actually an intelligence asset. But it doesn't seem like Tomer is really acting fully in the New Republic's best interest. Part of it, to me, seems like Tomer is acting more in his best interest, that it doesn't matter how I get this done as long as I do, and then that way I will start working my way up the ladder in the New Republic intelligence agency.
Yeah, when you first meet him, he's a little smarmy, but you don't really think a lot of him. At least I didn't. But he's written to be, I think, a very hateable character, and that's what he's there for us to really not like. And in that regard, I think Alston pulls it off. Here, he's manipulating things. He's the one who makes them run the gauntlet when they shouldn't have to. Frankly, they shouldn't have almost died several times, but they do because of his machinations. And he really only cares about himself and rising up in the intelligence ranks. And I think he thinks if he can pull this off, he is going to get that huge big promotion, and the ends justify the means as long as he gets there.
Yeah, he is a little bit smarmy when we first meet him, but he just seems to me at the beginning, when you first think he's part of the diplomatic corps, that he's just a little exasperated. That it would be easier to do this if the Adumari would just negotiate with him as a diplomat rather than bring in these fighter pilots who really don't have any training in negotiations such as this.
Yeah, I agree. And like, if he was just a politician, that would be perfectly understandable. He's just trying to do his job, and these 4 fighter jockeys don't know what they're doing. They're not going to bring Adumar into the New Republic. He's the one who has the training and the skill to do it in a way that they simply can't. So if he was just a politician, he'd be, a little annoying, but also you would totally get where he's coming from. But because he is so much more than that, he's manipulating things in a way that takes a little while for Wedge and the others to realize.
So there are 2 characters that we didn't talk much about during the plot summary that I want to focus on a little bit here because they are pretty cool characters. Hollis Saper, the holodocumentarian, and Cheris, I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name, the the young female Adumari guide isn't the right word, but she's kind of the guide for the rogues as they're there in Cartan. Hollis is interesting. When you first meet her, she's got a second head. That she's a human that has mounted a protocol droid's head on her shoulder that records everything. And she says, the reason I do this is because everyone then just looks at the head. They forget about me. It allows her to occasionally take the head off and mingle with people who don't even recognize that she's the person that they had maybe interacted with the day before. It grants her access that she normally wouldn't. She uses this ability twice to help Wedge gain information that he would not be privy to, mostly about Tomer going behind his back.
Yeah, she's a great character, and I love the visual of the 3PO unit on her shoulder. It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the BBC version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy from, I think, maybe the 80s or 90s, and there's a character, Zaffoy Beeblebrox. He's got a second head on his shoulder, and it's like a paper mache head just kind of like flopping around the entire time. It's really funny, and that's the visual I have whenever I think of her, which always makes me laugh. And I actually wonder if Alston was maybe even writing to that, because I'm sure he saw this back in the day. She's so smart and unexpected in a lot of ways, because like you said, she can just kind of disappear into the crowd. And the first time Wedge sees her without Whitecap, that was the droid's name, he was kind of like, "Wait, Hollis? Really?" And like that reaction was exactly what you were talking about. People just don't realize and recognize her without that droid. And I also remember she makes like children's holodocumentaries as well, I think. And Wedge kind of had a thought, like, she kind of looks a little terrifying to be around children, but okay, whatever. Well, who am I to judge?
Well, she does say that kids love the head. Kids love the droid head. Yeah, if I remember correctly, that was in like the second state dinner that Wedge was at, and Hollis shows up without Whitecap she's just wearing a gown and she's got her hair up. And he, for the first like 5 seconds of looking at her, he like does 2 or 3 double takes before he's like, wait a minute, I know who you are. And she's like, yeah, I've been with you the entire time since we've been on Allegiance. People just don't and if you think about it, this is a great quality for someone who's a hollow documentarian, because you don't want to be part of the story. You want people to kind of forget that you're there. It also, flash forward to the end of the story, allows Hollis to then join the New Republic intelligence agency. She gets recruited by Kraken because of her ability to gather information and lay it out in a coherent order for her superiors.
One of my favorite things about this book is she actually manages to record the conversation that Tomer has when he tells the Predator to make the rogues run the gauntlet. And they have no idea she has this footage. And she shows this first to Ayala, and that's when Ayala is like, okay, I'm joining Wedge and the others because this is complete BS. And at the end of the book, Tomer has no idea she has that footage. He thinks he's going to, maybe serve a little bit of jail time, but he's probably going to get away with most of this and like with a slap on the wrist. He is going away for a long time because of that footage, and he has no idea. And I think that's just delightful. He is going to get his comeuppance.
So the other character is Cheris. Like I said, she's a young woman. She is a champion ground fighter, like they call in the book. Basically, she's not a pilot. Cheris has vertigo, and she has a difficult time with heights when they're flying around. Cheris wants to impress Wedge throughout the book. And Cheris has a little bit of a crush on Wedge. Even though Wedge pretty quickly and clearly tamps that down, saying, look, Cheris, I have no interest in you. There's a pretty big age gap here. It would not be professional. I'm kind of your boss right now, too, since you've been assigned to me. But anyway, in order for Cheris to try to impress Wedge, she accepts a bunch of fights. Wedge doesn't like it because she's accepting them in his name. He can't stop her, though, because of her culture. The only thing he can ask is that she doesn't kill anybody. But later on in the book, Wedge has a conversation about her, about the fact that, yes, he hasn't really lost a fight yet. He's still alive. But he doesn't fight for honor. And he doesn't really see any honor in continually fighting. I think that may be my favorite conversation that takes place between two characters in this story.
Yeah, one of the themes of this book is not just Wedge, but Tycho, Hobby, West. They're all talking to the other pilots after, because when they introduced the idea of sim weapons, the rogues win, and then they're like, hey, you want to go again? And the Adumar are like, we can do that? We can fight a second time? What do you mean we can fight a second time?
Yeah, because you're still alive.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that's the point. You're still alive. And then after they would fight, they would all kind of land and talk about not just tactics, but also philosophy. And at some point, one of them says something about, the greatest honor is to be the best fighter and kill everyone, etc. And I think it was Hobby or Tycho was like, no, the greatest honor is surviving and protecting what you love, protecting who needs your help. And that's kind of like the running theme of this. And Cheris is probably the best example of that. Like she is ready to die, maybe like halfway, 2/3 through this book, because of honor, and also she is so upset about other things happening that we're going to get to in a second. And Wedge is like, you are not being honorable right now. What you are doing is not honorable. You are throwing your life away for nothing. And it actually gets through to her. But unfortunately, at this point in time, she's already accepted a fight and she can't back out. And she loses the fight and she almost dies. And in one of my favorite moments, Wedge is actually about to step in and stop the fight, but Wes beats him to it. And Wedge is like, Wes, what are you doing? And Wes is like, well, I got a plan. And Wedge is like, I mean, Okay, go for it. And Wedge's plan was literally just block once because they use these things called blast swords, which I think are really cool. Wedge is able to block the first time and then just basically punch the guy out and take his weapon away. Wedge is like, that was your plan? Be able to block the first hit and then punch him? And Wedge is like, yeah, I figured I could do it.
Yeah, he did notice in all the fights, it seemed, yes, they were fights to the death, but there was sort of an unspoken, honorable way to fight. And he noticed that, you know what, there's no brawlers here. I'm a brawler. Let me just see if I can jack this guy in the face. It's like the old Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And that's what he does.
Yeah, and this is also, as I mentioned earlier, this is a great Wedge book. This is also a really good West book because, like, he has kind of been Alston's trajectory of humor through the Wraith books, like thinking like back to the Ewok things and him being naked holding a stuffed Ewok, which is one of my favorite images in Star Wars. It's so funny. And this book, he's also incredibly funny, but he's also more than just the humor. And that sequence is such a great Wes Janson moment, and I love it.
Right, because he also says when he stops Wedge, because Wedge is like, let me do this. And Wes is like, no, you're the diplomat here. What happens if you lose and you die? You know, it's not as big a deal if I get killed.
Yeah, so it's a great Wes book.
So the other faction that the Rogues are going up against is the Empire. Thankfully, in my opinion, we don't get much from the Empire in this book. It pretty much just follows Wedge and the Rogues, but he does have a few meetings with Admiral Rogris. And if folks remember, we first met Rogris back in the Wraith books as they ended up helping Han Solo in the Wraiths as they were hunting for Warlord Zinj, you know, Crystal's favorite, Warlord Zinj.
Yep.
They're on different sides, but Wedge considers Rogris an honorable military man, and he helps the Admiral with coming to terms with orders he knows the Admiral does not agree with from the Imperial Remnant. Meaning, I understand if you guys lose these negotiations to us, your superiors have most likely told you, destroy this planet. How did you enjoy the two sort of clandestine meetings that Wedge and Rogris have together?
So first, I have to say, I love that he was in this book. One of the things I love about the EU is characters popping up in one book and then showing up in a book months, years, decades later. And it makes the wider universe of stories just feel so much more connected. And it made so much sense for him to be in this book with the story that's being told. So that's the first thing. I just love that he's in this book in the first.
It was also a character that Alston created himself, so he knew he had him out there.
Yes. So it makes sense. Yeah, that is one thing. Like, he Stackpole's on. Like, they will make a character and then left with the ranks in the years. Like, can I bring one of those characters I made back rather than making something brand new? If I can and it makes sense, great. I'm gonna do it. And that, again, it helps make things feel more cohesive and whole. And I really like that about it. And I liked their conversations. There was one conversation they had where they were talking about why the Empire named Star Destroyers the way they do. You know, the Devastator, Death from Above, Kill All, whatever it is. Like, these are names that are, they sound bad, frankly. And it's how do you, as a man of, in Margaret's case, a man of honor, kind of get around what you're doing and that you're on this death machine called the Death Machine, and how do you get around that, and how do you compile that with who you are as a person? And they have this really fascinating discussion about why Star Destroyers are named the way they are. And it was kind of Wedge was saying that I think Luke had a theory that basically it was just one of the ways that Palpatine would do to kind of control the Empire. Like, you can try and be a good man, but if you're on something called, you know, Kill All Bothans, you're not really going to be able to get that an option to be that good person, even though you want to be. You're going to have to follow what you're on. And I thought that was a really interesting conversation.
Wedge knows that Rogris is probably under some orders he does not truly believe in. He thinks those orders maybe be illegal, but if not illegal, they're at least immoral to Rogris himself, in Rogris's sense of morality. And we see how that happens at the end. When Adumar does agree to join the New Republic, the Imperial Remnant orders the Agonizer to start bombarding the planet. But Rogris isn't there. He skips town. He takes Wedge's advice. Should we have some sort of compassion for Rogris?
That's a hard thing to say yes to for someone who's a career Star Destroyer commander, given what the Empire has done. But at the same time, when someone realizes they can't do this anymore and they need to get away, that is still something that should be not celebrated, because that's too strong a word, but should be encouraged.
I would agree. Encouraged and appreciated.
Yes, that's another good word for it.
You should never, in my opinion, you should never be known for the worst thing you've ever done in your life. You should never be known for the best thing you've done in your life, because everyone has done some good and some bad. That being said, just because you do the right thing at some certain point, that doesn't erase all of the bad choices you've made. I'm not saying that Rogris is the worst Imperial that there has ever been, but let's say he's even the best Imperial. He was still an Imperial, and Rogris was an Imperial for a long time. He talks about how he was at the Battle of Endor. So this isn't some guy who just joined the military only a month before.
Yeah. Or like I've talked about, I think with you, but definitely on TK331, how my favorite Imperial is Paleon, which is a weird thing to say that I have a favorite Imperial, because I was like saying you have your favorite Nazi, but I think Paleon is such a fascinating character because he is trying to thread that needle of like there are some good things about the Empire, the Order, and the stability, and that's what he's trying to focus on. And he's not this deranged war criminal who wants to, fire on civilians constantly. He's trying to find a middle ground, and he's sometimes successful and sometimes not. But I think he's such a fascinating character because he does have that sense of honor, and he is trying to find a better way than most people in the Empire. And Rogris is a lot like that, in my opinion. So I like Imperial characters like that who have some, I guess for lack of a better word, just doubt in their mind about everything that the Empire does. Because if there was more doubt in the Empire, then maybe things would not have been as bad as it was.
It makes it difficult to hate all these people when some of these authors show the characters as having some bit of introspection about the things they've done throughout their Imperial career. So, last thing about the story, the authors of the X-Wing books between Stackpole and Alston have finally written Qui-Zooks out of existence.
Bye!
Clearly, Stackpole and Alston did not like that relationship between Wedge and Qui-Zooks.
Yeah, it's kind of impressive and hilarious to think about. It's like the Jedi Academy trilogy came out well before any of these X-Wing books, so Qui was very much an established character. And then along comes Stackpole and then Alston, and they're writing books that take place well before the Jedi Academy trilogy, and they create this character, Aela. And clearly there is an attraction between her and Wedge, a very strong one. But they can't get them together before the Jedi Academy trilogy because of what happens there. And they come up with ways and reasons why they don't. For example, Aela's long-lost husband shows back up in, not the Back to War, but was it Kratos Trap where he shows up, I think, at the end. And just like they keep putting things in from stopping them from getting together, and it works for the story, but also just kind of elongates their courtship, if you will. And then if you read this in order, it's like, oh, I really want Wedge and Aela to get together. And then you get to the Jedi Academy trilogy. Where's Aela? Who's this Qui chick? I don't like her. But if you read this in publishing order, you might actually prefer Wedge and Qui because that's what is there first. And clearly I feel like that's what Anderson was kind of trying to make as a possible endgame for Wedge was Quee as this final romance. But I'm also really glad that didn't happen. Like, I don't mind them getting together in the Jedi Academy trilogy initially. But after Kip wipes her memory, that's where I'm like, I don't like this anymore. I am not on board with it.
Yeah, then it was a little odd because she didn't remember anything. Well, I shouldn't say anything because Kip didn't wipe all of her memories completely, but he wiped out such a large portion of the important work she had did in her life that in some ways it made her a different person.
Yeah, it almost set her back to, I think, like 10 or 12 years old, it felt like, because like she'd been working on this project for most of her life, living at the mall.
It did make her seem extremely naive.
Yes.
At that point. And I guess this story takes place after the Jedi Academy trilogy. From what I remember, for the books that had been published at the time, there was no other reference to Quee and Wedge being together.
Right.
So Alston,
she wasn't Darksaber.
right, but I don't think she and Wedge were together in that book, if I remember correctly.
I think they were together, but this takes place after Darksaber, and in Darksaber, she was not there a lot. I think she was talked to because of the Death Star plans that were being used. So she comes up, but she was not a major part of that book.
Well, whatever. Alston took advantage of the situation and just said, we're breaking these two up now. And
yes, he did.
Stackpole created this really compelling character named Ayala that when you read the writing, there was more of a spark between Wedge and Ayala than there ever was between Wedge and Quee. So we're going to put these two together now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm very thankful that both Stackpole and Alston decided to do that. Because Wedge Quee, again, before Kip wiped her, it was okay. It wasn't great, but it was fine. But Wedge Ayala is so much more interesting and dynamic, and they just work better together because of who they are. You know, one's intelligence, one's a fighter pilot, but they just they work so well together in so many different ways. And we see that throughout the X-Wing books, starting with Wedge's Gamble when she's introduced, with what they do together on Coruscant when they're trying to liberate the planet.
So I always like to kind of finish these discussions about the story in terms of, is there anything in this book, be it directly or just maybe some of the themes or overwhelming storylines, that you could see being used in canon today? I've always wanted to see Ayala Waseri in canon as just a New Republic operative. I understand that she and Wedge probably can't have the same relationship because of the relationship that Wedge has with, what is her name?
Nora
Wexley, that's right. But I do think it'd be kind of cool to see Ayala Waseri, the intelligence operative, in canon.
Agreed. Because, like, their relationship is important, but it's not like she's not just Wedge's girlfriend or wife. She's so much more than that. So I agree. She'd be a great character to bring into canon because she can fit almost anywhere in the timeline because of her skills. You always need someone like her, whether it be in the Rebellion era, the New Republic era, the Resistance. Like, she'd be a great Resistance fighter.
Yeah, she could be great in the sequel timeline, like you're saying.
Yeah.
She would work as one of the Fulcrum agents during the Age of the Empire.
Absolutely. She'd be wonderful in that role.
Any others that you could think of?
I kind of think Adumar could come into, like, it feels like a very unique planet in Star Wars because you almost never see a planet that does not have a world government. So not necessarily Adumar, but maybe a planet similar to Adumar we could see show up of like this one that's frankly like ours. You know, you've got dozens, hundreds of different countries, all with their own ideas of, you know, what things should be like. So I think that could be an idea that could be used within Disney canon very easily.
You would think, though, it would have to be similar that it would probably be a planet that was sort of isolated, and the planet themselves didn't know a whole lot about what was going on in the rest of the galaxy.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Thomas, good discussion. It's almost time to go. But before we do, there is another email that I have. This one is from listener Paolo, who has an opinion about the Dark Empire comics that he wanted to share on the show. Paolo says, "Hi, Aaron. I really loved your Dark Empire episode. I appreciate that you try to find the reasons why someone may enjoy something, even if it's not your cup of tea. We need more people like that in the world. I'm sad that I'm not on social media, as I would have been honored to talk about the series with you, as I loved the series as a kid. As much as the central story of Dark Empire is the most important, I remember loving the epic nature of the stories. The galaxy gun thing was fine, and the next logical step post-Death Star. But I was particularly appreciative of the world devastators, the way the Eclipse seemed to fly off the pages, and the new fighters that were a great addition and made me want to be the next member of Rogue Squadron." Thomas, let me ask you real quick, because you and Crystal did your own episode on the Dark Empire comics. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but I do think that you like that story a little more than Crystal and I do. So, yeah, just quickly, what did you think about the Dark Empire series, and what did you think about some of the things that Paolo talked about in his email?
So when I talk about Dark Empire, I kind of actually start not with the story, but what it means to me. Dark Empire, I think, was my introduction to the EU. When I was very young, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, my parents got me the cassette tapes for Dark Empire 1 and Dark Empire 2.
Nice.
And I listened to those things so much. I do not know or remember when I first read Empire's End. That was definitely years after that. But Dark Empire 1, Dark Empire 2 they're a core part of my Star Wars fandom. So they mean a lot to me from that perspective. I don't think some of the story, some of the writing is as strong as other stuff, especially Zahn stuff around that time. But I also think they are very important to the Star Wars mythos as a whole. I mean, just giving us Anakin Solo alone is one of the greatest things, probably the greatest thing those comics give us. He is one of my favorite EU characters, and he doesn't exist without Dark Empire. I agree with Paolo. The World Devastators, I think, are such a great new weapon of the Empire, and I remember I felt such terror just listening to them on those cassette tapes back in the day. And they were actually used in, I think it was Rogue Leader, the second Rogue Squadron video game. I think there's a level where you actually have to face those, and it was very difficult. Galaxy Gun, is it the next launch post Death Star? Yes. Don't love it. Was it used in Force Awakens essentially with Starkiller Base? Also yes. Also not my favorite thing. So I appreciate Dark Empire for what it was at the time. I don't love everything about it, but I also find that story to be just so personally valuable to me because of what it means to my love of Star Wars and how it really helped get me started on this. So like I listened to this series, and I think the first books I read may have been the Jedi Prince series, which I definitely do not look back on very fondly. I consider those the worst Star Wars stories I've ever read. So it's kind of amazing how I first read Dark Empire and Jedi Prince and still became a big Star Wars fan. But soon after that, I read Zahn, I read Truce Bakura, Jedi Academy trilogy, and just took off from there. But it all started with listening to those Dark Empire tapes.
You heard it here first, folks. Thomas does not like Trioculus.
No, I don't. I don't. He's not even the worst part, but no. No, he might be the worst part.
Well, Paulo also included a March Madness-inspired Star Wars character group in his email in honor of the recent NCAA tournaments. It's a matchup between two teams. Team number 1 is the Jedi Academy Padawans, and team number 2, the Outer Rim Spice Runners.
Love the team names. So, playing for the Padawans are Point guard, Leia Organa. She's a natural floor general who can get the best out of everyone on the floor. Shooting guard, Anakin Skywalker. Can do it all from an offensive perspective and can take over the game when needed. Small forward, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's an elite defensive stopper who can guard the opponent's best perimeter player every night. Power forward, Mace Windu. He's the primary interior who is unflappable as the game gets into crunch time. Center, Qui-Gon Jinn. A steady presence in the middle who provides veteran leadership that can adapt to the game if the original game plan goes awry. Sixth man, Ahsoka Tano. She's versatile enough to fill positions 1 through 3 with unique skills which provides a matchup headache for opposing defenses. And the coach, Yoda. He's steadfast and wise, but can be a bit stubborn.
Stubborn's a little bit of an understatement there, Paolo.
Yes.
Suiting up for the Spice Runners are point guard, Wedge Antilles, a natural leader who can also take over the game as the leading scoring guard. Shooting guard, Han Solo, an unpredictable and fearless scorer who gets better as the odds get worse. Small forward, Bo-Katan Kryze, a versatile secondary scorer who can also run the offense when Wedge is not in the game or is playing off ball. Power forward, Cassian Andor, a do-it-all hustle player who does the dirty work on defense and on the boards. Center, Chewbacca, with size and a mean streak, who dares anyone to enter the paint, but also sets thunderous screens, especially for Han. Sixth man, Boba Fett, the ultimate wild card who can adapt as the game changes. And the coach, Grand Admiral Thrawn, a strategic genius who does more scheming than leading, but with all the leadership on this team, morale stays high. That's a great list, Paolo. My favorite ones are defensive stopper Obi-Wan Kenobi and Chewie as the monster in the paint. Thomas, I know you're more of a hockey fan, but what do you think of Paolo's March Madness teams?
I think they're both great. I'm going to assume the Padawans can't use the Force because that would be unfair. But I actually think the Spice Runners take it in a match between these two teams. I think it's 2 reasons. One, I think Chewie at center is just inspired, and you're not going to beat him. Just full stop.
Who on the Padawans is going to get a rebound?
Exactly. And then second, and this actually might be the bigger thing, and this also might give me some hate, Thrawn is going to outcoach Yoda. Full stop.
Yeah, Yoda seems like more of a Phil Jackson style, give the players like some weird philosophical book to read in the off season, while Thrawn's over there with the whiteboard and he's sitting there drawing plays left and right.
And I don't follow basketball that closely, but I did play it a lot growing up, and I played a lot of sports growing up. And of the ones I played, basketball was the one that had the most influence via tactics. Like, a smart coach with the right run of play can absolutely win any game. So I between Chewie and Thrawn, I definitely give this matchup to the Spice Runners.
As do I, provided no one is allowed to use the Force.
Yes, that changes things. I actually think the biggest advantage the Padawans have are having both Anakin and Obi-Wan on the court together, just because the chemistry between the two of them, that's going to be hard to stop. And also, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan also have amazing chemistry. So there's some chemistry on that team that can absolutely flip it in their favor. But I still give it to the Spice Runners more often than not.
I agree. Thanks again for the email, Paolo. One question, though. Will there be too much tension between Leia and Anakin for them to play in the same backcourt? I'm maybe a little worried there, Thomas.
Oh, yeah, a little bit. I'm not sure if Yoda is the right one to diffuse that situation, especially if Mace gets involved.
Yeah, that's another thing. So you got Obi-Wan and Anakin and Qui-Gon all on the court at the same time, but on the opposite side, you got Leia and Mace, who aren't the biggest Anakin fans in the world.
No.
So a little bit of chemistry issues there. All right, now it is time to wrap up. Listener, if you'd like to contact the show, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Blue Sky, Instagram, or Twitter at swlegendslounge. Send me your questions and your comments. If you disagree with something I've said on the show, let me know. I'll read your opinion. And send me your favorite Star Wars character groupings. I love all the messages. Thomas, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. It's always a lot of fun to come on and talk Star Wars with you.
Tell us what's coming up next on TK331 and how people can get in touch with you and Crystal if they want to.
We are currently in the middle of the Young Jedi Knight series. In actually just 2 days, on May 3rd, we'll be releasing Jedi Bounty, the next book in the Diversity Alliance saga, which there are some issues that I have with him as the villain, so I'm going to say. But I actually think Jedi Bounty is one of the 2 books that I really like in the Diversity Alliance saga. And then after that, later this month, we'll be doing Interlude at Darknell, the first book in Tales from the New Republic.
And if people want to get in touch with TK331?
They can email us at tk331podcast@gmail.com and follow us on Twitter at tk331. And I think that's all we have, right? Yes, that's what we have.
Awesome. Coming up on the next episode, I'll be joined by Thomas's better half, the other host of TK331, Crystal. She and I will talk about one of the more famously ridiculed stories in Legends, The Crystal Star by Vonda N. McIntyre. And listener, I will tell you why I think the book's reputation is totally unwarranted.
Them's fighting words.
You can look forward to that episode coming out on May 15th. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Motes. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.